Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. I'm Morgan Hayes, assistant professor in Biosystems and Ag Engineering at the University of Kentucky, focusing on livestock facilities. And in my personal life, I farm in Boyle County, Kentucky, approximately a 500-acre commercial cattle and hay operation.
I'm Josh Jackson, assistant professor in Biosystems and Agriculture Engineering as well. I focus on precision livestock farming, and in my home life, we focus on raising registered Angus cattle and some hay production.
Okay, Josh. Our topic today is RFID, which I'm kind of excited about. I kind of find RFID tags interesting, and the concept of using them potentially really valuable. But before we get into that, I just wanted to take a minute and talk about what's been happening on the farm for the last week.
So last week, still doing some bush hogging. So got a lot of bush hogging to do. Just a little bit more to be done, and then we're just mainly knocking down some of the weeds right now. A lot of the iron weeds, all of the bird plants, they're pretty much fairly bad right now. And then also, so bush hogging, thinking about doing some hay, but still working on a lot of repairs on equipment. And then we're also calving. So I think we had a set of twins, maybe, unless another cow claims them. I'm pretty sure it's a set of twins.
Was that a new development yesterday evening or this morning?
That was a new development probably about 2 days ago, when I went out there and found one calf and thought she was supposed to be moved home this weekend, the calf. And so she was a little bit earlier than we expected. And then I went out there to tag it, and there was two calves, and they were running around, so I ended up not tagging either one. Couldn't catch one of them, so they were too excited at that point. And after that, they were too old to catch, so we'll move them this weekend and get them tagged.
We have been calving as well. We are almost done. We have one heifer left to calve.
Wow, that's great.
And that's not. We have cows left to calve. I should specify cows left to calve, but only one heifer left. And for me, the heifers are sort of a heavier watch group, like one that I'm more concerned about watching. Although our bull did everything you would have expected a calving ease bull for heifers to do. He's been throwing 50 to 60 pounders consistently, which is probably going to be terrible when we go to market them. But for calving out of a heifer, it's an excellent number to see. So no complaints there. We have one set of twins on the ground, and the mother kept both.
Okay.
We'll see how that works. She's doing pretty good. One of them is like tight to her, and the other one wanders around, and I'm not sure what it does, but it doesn't seem to be stealing milk. It comes back to her to nurse twice a day. It's just a little more independent, if we will. Other than that, we've got overall, if we include heifers and cows, we're about 50%, just a little bit over 50% of the way through our calving. So not bad, not bad off of a natural service system to be one cycle in and have 50% on the ground, or just over 50%. So
that's fairly good. I think we're a little bit over 50 as well.
So yeah, not too bad. We're happy with that number. That's pretty good for us.
How's the fencing coming along?
The fence with the neighbor is done.
Oh, wow.
Got finished. It got finished yesterday. That's really good. I feel very good. We cleared some extra trees a week and a half ago, I guess, and they put up the fence, and everything looks to be in pretty good shape. Is it absolutely the way I would do it? No. Is it bad? No. It's a very good fence. We struggle a little bit in that it's a perimeter fence, and the neighbor has traditionally not done a lot of rotation. So their side is significantly lower than our side. So we worked on grading out some of the land between the two sides. The fence is put in correctly, but at spots it's high enough that a newborn calf could potentially roll under it. Just because the soil levels are so different on the two sides of the fields. And so in some spots, the fence is, this is not good, has moved slightly off of the property line to set it on to a known piece of dirt at a known height.
Yeah.
And also, I think from a driving perspective, it's very difficult to drive a vertical post
into a sheer wall.
into a wall of dirt, where one half has to drive an extra 6 or 8 inches, or in some cases 12 inches.
Oh,
So, which is just the nature of, if people want to talk about why you rotate cattle, and we can talk about pasture and productivity and stuff, but from a soil erosion standpoint, there's also some reasons to do it, and this would be one of them.
Huh. And so they're able to grade it all out a little bit, I guess.
Grade it a little bit, yeah.
And get them put in. So they were actually fairly quick putting it in.
Yeah, it went in pretty quickly. The crew did a good job. I'm really pretty pleased with that.
Okay. And you guys use 5-inch or 6-inch posts for your down the line. I guess not your corner post.
Our corner posts are bigger, but they're not 6 inches. They're more towards the 5-inch side.
Okay.
And it's alternated with steels. So we have a steel post and then a wood post, and we have some braces. The contractor did a pretty good job of matching topography and getting good, taller wood posts in where there was topography changes to make sure we get them set correctly, which is also nice. So that fence is up. Our cattle are on that field finally. We had to kind of move them around. We've been shuffling them. We've had some single wire that we had them on, but neither of us feel very comfortable with that. So we kept trying to push them onto fields that were contained away from that fence line, but the majority of our fields have that fence line in common.
Okay.
It's just the way that it's just how our farm is set up. So, So yeah, I think that's probably one of the biggest
accomplishments of and loads off your back, I guess.
Yeah. And we're bush hogging a little bit more, but we're almost done bush hogging at this point. A couple more fields to go.
Okay.
We've got a little bit more to do, but we'll talk about that at the end about what we're doing next week.
All right. I guess we want to jump into talking about some RFID and.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about RFID, or radio frequency identification, and a little bit about where it gets used in the industry right now, where it's potentially getting used in the industry.
So we talk about where it's being used right now. I know a lot, like for individuals who show cattle, they have to put in the 840 tag. Take them to different shows and to go out of state. You have to go put in the 840 tag. So that's one where, it's a button tag typically. So it'll be small, it's about the size of a quarter, yellow. And so you just have that button in there. And so you're able to scan it with either a wand or like a different type of reader.
Could even be in a panel, yeah. Could be any number of readers. And the 840 tag is a specific, I think it's a 15-digit tag.
Yep.
And it's specifically, an 840 is one that is for animals specifically, and it also identifies it as a low-frequency tag, so it's part of the U.S. animal identification system, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it has a subset of numbers where they're specifically identifying this animal.
Exactly. But the 840, that starting number, is just an indication that it's an animal tag in the U.S.
Yep.
So,
And so, these tags are, they work fairly well, I think, and they can be, the read range will vary a little bit. There's 2 different types of tags. I don't know if you want to mention that or.
Yeah, there's half and full duplex on the low frequency tags, and the half duplex tags are typically, they read further, but they're slower to read. So if you're pushing a lot of animals through really quickly, you want full duplex because you want to catch all the animals. But if you're slowly putting one animal through a chute at a time, a half duplex gives you a better read range. So if there's any interference on the system, you can get better reads from further away.
Okay.
The other thing I will say is that all of these tags work based upon having a coil of metal inside them. And so the amount of copper, typically it's copper inside there that's coiled up, will affect how far the read range is. So even 2 tags that look identical could have different metal volumes inside there, metal mass inside there, different coil masses that would cause them to read differently.
And the full duplex, it's like 2 people talking at once almost.
Yep, you can send and receive information. So, which is useful. Most people don't send a lot of information to the tags, just in general, the way they're utilized today.
Okay.
I mean, at least not from a use in commercial settings.
Yeah.
On a research side, full duplex is probably what more people lean towards, because on the research side, that's certainly a valuable
valuable aspect.
Yeah. And all of these they're low frequency and they're passive tags, right? That's the other thing worth noting. There's no power in the tag. The tag doesn't have a battery or anything like that. It doesn't ever die. It's
relying on the reader to send out that signal to power the tag.
You're basically using that coil of copper or whatever metal is in there. I think it's almost always copper, though, at least for these types of tags. Other RFID systems use some different metals. You're always going to have that coil in there, and it's going to create a magnetic field because of the charge coming from the antenna or reader.
Right.
Yeah.
And, we've done some work, it's been probably about 5 years ago, with some near field communication tags. And so it was actually a little bit different. So it's a different type. This was more of a research basis, but we were trying to do some NFC, because NFC is something that you'd have it's your Apple Pay. It is your, it's on your smartphones. And so we're trying to use that. Like, everybody has a smartphone. Why don't we try to use that? We figured out there are several flaws with that strategy.
Yeah, the NFC is pretty interesting. And you said Apple Pay and things like that. So a lot of people are exposed to this technology, but they're not really introduced to it, if that makes sense.
Right.
The challenge with it is a touch system.
Yep.
And trying to touch an animal when they're when they're a little worked up is a little more difficult. Tapping them, especially if it's on an ear tag.
Yep.
If any of you ever tag your cattle, put your fly tags in and stuff, you know how frustrating it is when they keep shaking their head every time you touch their ear. And
it was a system that we could put, we did like the NFC. We liked the fact that you could put anything, information you wanted to on it. So we could put anywhere from 128 to, I think it was approximately 900 bytes of information on the tag. So we could put the location of the cow's name, phone number, just a assortment, any vaccinations she had. So we could put a lot of data on there. But we had to also transfer that data. So it's going to take a little more time. It was seconds.
Yeah.
But it wasn't going to be.
It wasn't instantaneous.
Yeah. And so, but it worked. It did work. We tried on a couple of farms. It did work. But we had them custom made in China. So there were issues with the tags quality, but it wasn't the reader itself.
It's kind of interesting.
So
yeah, I think the NFC is an interesting technology. I doubt it's where we're going to go from an identification standpoint. That's one of the reasons you and I both sit on a ASABE technical committee that does standards related to RFID animal identification. And one of the things that's really important is that 15-digit ID is very specific in how it gets assigned, at least the first few digits, and unchangeable. That number is unchangeable. So it's a fixed identification for as long as that tag is in that animal, and it's non-repeatable. So once you have that tag, no one else has that number, and it's an ISO standard at this point, I believe. So that means it's an international standard that's not just the U.S., but all countries have their own 840 tag, but they don't all say 840, but they all are relatively the same. So.
Yeah, I think it's a ISO 1178485, I believe.
Correct. I think that's correct as well. And it's important that those exist, because that's what allows for some. Not only does the identification number become more consistent across countries and across states and make trade easier and things like that, but it also controls how they get read.
Yep.
And so. What ends up happening is we send out signal and then receive back signal on the half duplex, or on the full duplex, we send and receive signal at a certain rate, hertz, or however you want to think of that frequency at which communication occurs.
Yep.
And so it is really important that we have ISO standards so that if I buy a reader from one company and you buy a reader from a different company, we can both read that tag.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that was. I would say that RFID has sort of shown up in the U.S. and it was sort of the Wild West when it started.
Yeah, it was definitely, I think we oftentimes refer to it as the oldest new technology.
Yes. Yeah, well, I think a lot of things came in and it wasn't regulated at all, and so people had different read rates. I think there's still challenges with some of the research software, and people struggle with having multiple RFID systems in barns if they don't all follow the same ISO standards.
Right. And that was one of the things, even with the NFC tags, we made we had our own, but the challenge was, how do we have a registered Angus cow versus commercial cow? How do you input that differently? And so at what point, what's the most important information? Do we use abbreviations? So, we found, producers, and we're kind of tepid response from producers for it, because they had to get too close, and then you could use it in the chute. We could record vaccinations, like, we don't care.
Yeah.
So it was just figuring out what is most valuable to them. And at that point, it wasn't really useful to them. But we said everybody had a smartphone. Putting that $1,000 smartphone next to a cow's head is not the best idea, when they could hit it, break it. So we said, I'll just buy a cheap $50 one. And the other complication was, for the longest time, was it didn't work on Apple phones. Apple had their NFC locked down with Apple Pay. So they just had it locked down. So there weren't a lot of third-party apps that we could use initially. So that was another challenge.
And everything we've talked about so far, though, has been a passive tag. But there are active tags as well on the market, aren't there?
There are some active tags. I think some that we're using more. There have been some with Bluetooth, and there's, the Cow Manager is the one that is an active tag as well.
Yeah, and I think there are even active RFID tags. In fact, I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think some of the systems that are used where they're reading for really long ranges have to have active tags to get that read range right. And then they can also figure out, sometimes they can do some proximity measurements when they have an active tag, because they can figure out how much signal they're receiving and figure out through some triangulation sometimes distance.
Yep.
I don't think it's a perfect system, but it is an option out there. I think I've also seen, the thing we're talking about is most of these tags are for the ears of cattle so far that we've mentioned, but there are some other ways that RFID tagging can happen on animals. Some of the original work that was done with RFID was injectable. It was put under the skin. That made it somewhat more permanent so that it wouldn't be removed. When the cost was extremely high, that was an option. Most people don't do that today. Also, they can tend to move within, even though I said they don't move, they do. If they're under the skin subcutaneously, they can move around a little bit. So we can lose them. Sometimes they get ingested. Sometimes people will put them into the stomach, and then they'll collect other data as it goes through the digestive tract of an animal, which is kind of interesting.
And the only concern with the injectable one is just the adulterant aspect.
Yes, absolutely.
In the meat product, in the final meat product.
Yep. And that's definitely a research. People would be doing that for research purposes, not for commercial purposes. But also the other one that's sort of shown up on the market in the last couple of years is back tags that are RFID readable. And so when cattle go through a stockyards, at least here in Kentucky, if they're over a certain age, they get a back tag.
Yep.
And that back tag has a number on it, so that we can track what animals were sold that were older, because when they go to processing and stuff, if they're older and they go across state lines, we need to know who they are, and there's some health conditions that we're trying to prevent spreading.
Right.
So,
or if they are spreading, we can track them quickly.
We can backtrack quickly, yeah. So back tags are basically a sticky tag that's a little bit larger than the palm of my hand, and they just get plopped on the back with some glue. They usually stick there. If you see animals that get picked up with a back tag and they get put back out on pasture or backgrounded here in Kentucky, they sit on there for
3 days, some 3 days
up to a week. Yeah, up to a week. But enough time that they would get through the transport process on the other end. And if they were getting processed, they would make it to processing before the tag would fall off.
Yeah.
And some people have looked at putting coils into that. But the trick on that is that has to be a very flat coil. So it's a much smaller, typically, amount of wire in there. So they have to be read a little bit more carefully. They need to have larger panels with more power, or panels that are closer to the animal. Potentially
increased read range. That kind of brings us into the other system that we have. So we talked about near field communication, or NFC, talked about traditional RFID, and then another one, or type of RFID, is kind of the ultra high frequency RFID.
Yeah, and ultra high frequency, I think, has some potential, but also some challenges as well. Definitely better read ranges, but they're also really susceptible to interferences.
So that'd be your water and metal. Pretty much anything cows are water bodies, and the metal all around the cattle, everything that they have around them is going to be interfering potentially.
And motors too.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
that's another magnetic field, so it's another
Yep.
one that is really tricky and not ideal to have. Not ideal to have in a barn and try and read generally. So, but the benefit of the ultra high frequency is certainly the read range on it.
Yep.
They also have ISO standards, slightly different than the ones like the 840 tags, but the same concept in how identification is done with ultra high frequency. It's a little less developed because it's a little less utilized. It's certainly not part of our identification system that is being managed nationally here in the U.S.
I think it does, in my mind, have a lot of potential though, just because of that potential for the increased read rate.
Yeah, exactly.
And we have a sticker here, so I guess people who listen to the podcast won't be able to see, but it's just probably a 4-inch by 4-inch sticker, and then it's a RFID ultra high frequency tag.
Correct.
And so it's a flat sticker. And we've used that in a couple of had them inlaid or inserted into some cattle tags as well.
Yep. And that's the interesting thing is that we talked about the button tags. Those are pretty common, especially they can be for cattle, but we also see them on pigs and sheep and smaller ruminants. These flat tags are another thing that we, see potential in, but they probably would end up onto a more traditional tag.
Yep.
Which a lot of times we buy at the feed store, a 3-star or a 4-star, different size tags that hang down that have a visible number on them, which is the traditional way of identifying an animal. That or tattoo, I guess, would be the most common, and branding, I guess.
Yeah, no, because sometimes for us at least, the button would be very, very hard to see, and
Yes.
so getting a big visual tag like a traditional tag would be beneficial. So we have one where we inlaid and it's got the ultra high frequency within it, but having that visual tag and having the number on there really helps to be able to identify just visually sometimes the animals.
Yeah, I think that's pretty funny that you said sometimes it'd be hard to read the button tag, because maybe this is just a genetics decision that we've made on the farm that's wrong, but we have some hairier animals, and sometimes even the tag itself is covered with hair, and I can't read the number on it. So,
yep.
let alone feeding. So
when we do our fall working in November, or they're getting ready to breed the cow, sometimes we'll actually go in there and wash the tag off.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they get so much mud and stuff on there in the winter months, it's even hard that makes it difficult to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. It can be really tricky to figure out exactly what's happening. But
or if you tattoo the calf, it's just all everybody has a green tag at that point. Once you tattoo.
Okay.
It seems like for at least a week or two.
Okay.
Depending on how clean you were when you were doing everything.
There you go. You probably have a green tattoo too on your hands.
Yeah.
For a couple weeks. I don't know.
And so we have a lot of these different tags, and we have a couple the ways to read it. So one of them being a wand device, and so we have a wand. We have another smaller unit, the LPR potentially, so it's a little smaller, a little more cost effective potentially, and then the big panels themselves. I think we kind of mentioned that earlier as well.
Yeah, we see panels a lot. If you go out to larger sites that are reading a lot of animals, stockyards, processors, if they have a need to read, or sometimes even the shows. A lot of times they'll have wands, but they'll also have panels there depending on where you're going through to identify animals to make the process a little more efficient. Panels have a little more power on them, usually a little bit longer read range. But it is important if you have panels that you have one on both sides of the animal, because usually if you have it on the wrong side and the tag is in the wrong ear, you run into problems. So most panel systems end up with 2 panels. They also, and we've used this in some of our research, they also make more like rope system.
I forgot to mention the rope system. Yeah.
And the rope ones are sort of an in-between a panel and a wand. They're more like a wand, but they're flexible, so you can sort of wrap them. And we've used that in research, which we actually like. I think it's been pretty effective because we can get a top and a side out of one rope. It's not the strongest signal coming out of one, but the benefit is it's more flexible, so we get sort of around the animal a little bit more without having to put in 2 panels.
That's the one thing that I didn't quite mention. So we have these readers. So the ultra high frequency, we have to have a couple different components for that system.
Yeah, it is a little different set of components. Still need readers, still need computers still need antennas.
Yeah.
But all of them have slightly different requirements in terms of data management and equipment in the system. So
that is one thing. You mentioned data management, so pulling the data off. And so some of these can be fairly easy. You attach it to the computer with USB of some sort. Other ones, they suggest you have an app, but a lot of these apps have annual subscriptions or fees. So that's something else to think about is, are there additional fees or costs to the software to utilize it?
Yeah, that's certainly true. A lot of them do have costs associated with it. When I see people use RFID right now, some people are doing it for showing reasons, but the other reason I see people do it is because they have a scale system. Yep. And they have an RFID reader as part of the scale system, so that every time an animal goes through the chute and gets weighed, they also record.
It's automatically recorded.
They automatically are recording a weight, but also they can, if they have software as part of the purchase, which they've spent a lot of money if they have a scale system that also has an RFID reader on it, just as a preface. They've already spent a significant amount of money. They also have the software then typically so that they can put the vaccines in, and then as each animal goes through, they get identified as having gotten vaccinated as well. So that their medical records and their weight, all of that is going to be in one database on that software package, which is really interesting. I think for the most part, traceability is probably the highest priority for why people have put RFID tags in, though.
Okay.
Wouldn't you agree with that?
I would agree with that because, I think there was a push even, I think a year or two ago to try to look at even making the back tags, the ultra frequency back tags, the standard, and some other traceability aspects. So I think it just depends on where we are. And we're kind of seeing with the avian influenza, we see stuff taking place in other industries across the nation, agriculture, animal agriculture. And so we think it probably won't be long till if there is some major event, it might force us to implement a nationwide animal identification system.
Yeah, I mean, I think zoonotic diseases and some outbreaks of some different things could very quickly drive us in that direction. It's sort of driven us that way before, but it's died down before it's been implemented fully. And there's a little bit of how much public perception of an issue that there is, but it'll make a decision about that. But I think it's pretty interesting as well. I do think that we should be prepared that we might at some point have to have a little more identification. The beef industry in particular, and small ruminants sort of similarly, are non-integrated. They're much more... animals pass through a number of hands before they make it to a plate. And the reality is that there's a lot of risk associated with that. There's some benefit, in the sense that the system allows for some competition and some other things, but there are risks associated with having a lot of handling by different people and not having traceability and record keeping on those animals over time. And there's clear data from like a stockyard perspective or a feed yard perspective, that if they knew what they'd been treated with previously, that they could more effectively manage health later in the cycle, but they just don't have enough records to make that decision. They also, at the same time, can't purchase based upon that information because they don't know what happened previously.
And so that's where, we saw some of the CPH and the preconditioning programs, I think, become important here in Kentucky, just because they used to actually use a lot of RFID tags for those. And so just so that buyers would have that additional information. So it was kind of in that value added and also kicking some additional income to that producer for providing that information.
Yep. And it's been unclear. It seems like there is some value that producers do get out of it, but it's unclear if there's enough value to justify it. Always, I think it depends on the year and the sale and how the market conditions are in general as to how much premium that provides. But certainly having that premium there is good. Also, it's not always clear. Sometimes that premium comes through to the person buying and backgrounding, but it doesn't guarantee that information gets transferred to feed yard out west. They don't always get those records, even though, because the CPH sale requires that those records be had.
Taken, yeah.
But it doesn't require them to be in an electronic form to easily transfer with an animal. And it doesn't require that you maintain the animal ID that was included at the CPH sale. So, like, let's say I'm a buyer and I'm a backgrounder of cattle. I can buy cattle at a CPH sale, know that they're going to be healthy, background them, and know that they're going to take off and grow. But there's no guarantee that I'm going to keep that same ID tag in that animal when I go to sell it.
Right.
I may retag it with tags that I like.
Yep.
So I have a consistent group that I sell out west, and they might not then identify the animals that came from Josh's farm under his CPH. Which is kind of tricky. It's one of the reasons that having that 15-digit number on that 840 tag that doesn't ever change is so valuable.
Yeah, and it's supposed to be you should not remove that.
No, you're not supposed to remove them. That is true. That is something that should only happen once they go to the processor. So
and so I think during the pandemic and afterwards, I think we saw some more of off the farm beef sales taking place. I think there is some value maybe to producers, people knowing where their product is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is some value to that. And even we got the Kentucky beef in the marketplace. So there is, I think, some value in just knowing at some point in the future, where is this coming from? Where is it being produced? And maybe some traceability and transparency would help the industry. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but maybe it would help saying, we take care of our animals.
Absolutely. I think there's certainly value in that. I'm not sure how it's going to develop. I'm actually very curious to see how some of this develops, if it develops organically or if there is regulation that causes some of this to happen. Certainly for some of the exporting markets, having some of that traceability allows markets to open that are otherwise closed. Or potentially it could open up markets that are otherwise closed. Who knows? The pandemic has been very interesting for a lot of export markets anyway, and some of our markets don't really require that at all, but there are probably markets that would value that traceability.
Right. There's some that are more, like you said, more stringent. I think definitely.
So we'll see. I think it's all very interesting. The other thing I say is you have one tag there for a small ruminant here in front of us, and it's more of a clip tag that goes around the ear rather than a button tag.
It's more of a custom-made tag, and just so for a small animal, it has our own number on it. But really, we just had that so we could visually see what is that animal's number. So it was just, we made our own. It's RFID, so if they're in the chute, we can scan them through. But if they're in the field, we can still see and identify that animal. So.
Yeah, and one of the things I will say is if you go and purchase tags right now commercially, you can buy a button tag with a flat tag that has a readable number on it. And it doesn't have to be the whole 15-digit number that goes on the bigger tag. You can choose to put the last 4 of that or your own numbering system onto the more commercially utilized tag, the one that typically hangs from the ear. The typical ear tag can have an identification number on it, but still you would have a button tag for the national
identification. NAIS.
Yep. So all of that's kind of very interesting to see. So it is really, I think there's lots of opportunities, and also it'll be interesting to see how that market continues to develop. I think it is going to continue to grow, though.
I think so. And there's a little bit of additional cost to it. So maybe it was a little more dramatic, but I think it's come down, it seems, to some degree. I mean, it's probably it's not as bad as it was in the early 90s.
Yeah, no, I think we're probably under $5 a tag for the most part. Certainly, even if you buy paired tags, you're still under $10. And realistically, if you're buying regular tags, you're still spending a few dollars a tag. So it's relatively, you might be costing yourself double, I would say. I don't think you'd be costing any more than double on your tag.
Just about double is what I mean.
And I know how much I paid for my fly tags this year, so this cost seems very minor to me because I know I paid for 2 fly tags that go in and out each year. And the cost on that is still significantly more than what we're talking about for one RFID tag. So I think there's certainly potential there. Okay, let's end with that and just turn over and just talk about what's happening on the farm next week. Because I don't know that we're installing a lot of RFID tags this week.
I think for the next week we're going to be looking at potentially doing some hay, potentially, and then we're also just still calving out, still bush hogging, still repairing equipment. I mean, just kind of our basic. We're kind of just in impulse mode right now.
We are also calving out Also doing a little bit of bush hogging. We did take some animals to process. They'll get picked up next week. Meat will get delivered. Hopefully meat will get delivered. Otherwise, our freezers will be very full. And then other than that, we may sow a little bit of winter wheat in one of our fields to try, and one of our fields that has primarily worm season grasses in it, because we had such heavy weed pressure last spring, just to try and knock back some of that. We won't do a full application rate. We're not looking to grow wheat, and we're not even looking necessarily to harvest wheat, although we may take a hay crop in the spring, just to get it off of the field to allow our warmer season grasses to have enough sunlight to really take off. But it'll be interesting. We're gonna see if we can get a drill rented from the local place and get that applied. That would be ideal. So
Okay. Don't forget to say I went crazy and bought some fertilizer last weekend.
oh, you did go crazy then.
But I was like, I don't know what it's going to be next year, so I gave it. I rolled the dice and said, we'll throw some out and see where we end up.
Yeah, and we sent all of our soil samples in last week, so we will be evaluating. At least lime will get applied this fall, possibly some fertilizer, some P&K. I don't think we're going to throw any nitrogen on in the fall, but if we do need to put P&K on, we may consider doing it here this fall.
Just depends on what happens in the future.
It could be any number of things. So
anyway, I guess we'll end it there.
Sounds like a plan, Josh. And we will be back next week with another episode. I don't even know what we're talking about next week, but I think we're going to talk about calving. We're going to talk, because we should be about halfway through our calving season, sort of an update on how calving's been going, any sort of challenges. We've been having a couple challenges, but also some good things happening. So we'll talk about all of that next week.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thank you.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.